I mentioned before, our muscular acute responses are a type of acute response. Our previous ones ensure that more oxygen enters our body and bloodstream. That was a respiratory one. And our cardiovascular acute responses ensure that more blood and therefore more oxygen will travel to the working muscles. I don't think I really emphasized that enough. So the cardiovascular one was really about blood traveling to our working muscles. So we've got that venous return because it means more blood can return back to the heart and then be oxygenated before it goes back to the body. So our three mechanisms of venous return, the skeletal muscle pump, the vasoconstriction, and the respiratory pump. These are all methods of ensuring that our blood returns back to our heart and therefore gets oxygenated. Our other cardiovascular acute responses, increased heart rate means more blood's pumped faster, increased left ventricle or blood leaving the left ventricle, that's our stroke volume. That one is also a similar thing. And then we've also got increased cardiac output, which is a product of stroke volume and heart rate together. And then increased AVO2 difference. This wasn't really about blood going to the working muscles exactly, but more about the oxygen being extracted. And what was the last one we just looked at? Blood redistribution. More blood going to our working muscles as opposed to our other organs in order to ensure that we've got the maximum amount of oxygen being extracted there, and so we can have increased production of energy aerobically. How am I going for time? Okay, I'm going okay. So our muscular acute responses are then responsible for ensuring that the extra oxygen is used to produce ATP. Okay? This is a big one, especially if you've never come across this phrase before. Increased motor unit recruitment and activation. So motor units are the way in which muscles are actually controlled by the central nervous system. So an increase in motor unit recruitment simply means that more motor units are contracted, and this results in a greater force being produced by the muscles. The greater the force required by a movement, the more motor units will need to be recruited. So when a motor unit is activated, it will contract either maximally or not at all. So this is known as the all or nothing principle. So the all or nothing principle is a principle whereby it kind of talks about whether motor units, whether a muscle contracts or not. Like it will either contract maximally or it will contract not at all. There is no half-hearted contraction. So when you have increased exercise intensity, your body is going to undergo this acute response, which is an increased motor unit recruitment and activation. So more motor units will be recruited, meaning a more contractile force is generated by the muscle, and you've got a greater muscle force. Okay? I feel like that was a really bad definition. Pretty much increased muscular contraction. It's a stronger contraction occurring. Smaller, slow twitch muscle fibers are recruited first. So you've got many different types of muscle fibers. Some of them are small, slow twitch type fibers. The way I remember it is slow events, like cross country is quite a slow event, I would say. These require slow twitch fibers. Fast events like sprints, they have fast twitch fibers. So smaller, slow twitch muscle fibers are recruited first. After this, fast twitch fibers type A, and then the larger fast twitch fibers type B are recruited. The main thing I want you guys also to recognize with this area of study is we've just covered 15 different acute responses. You'll need to know about 4 of them for each system, so like cardiovascular, respiratory, muscular. If this is something which doesn't really stick in your brain, you don't worry too much about it. You need to pick your own 4 to remember for the exam. I mean, your stacks may be a bit different. For the exam, knowing about 4 of them should be fine. And so if this one doesn't really stick in your head, you can pick 4 other types of muscular acute responses and remember them instead. Because you need to be able to explain and discuss about 4 on your actual exam, in case VCAR asks you. Also recall that not all of these are really helping you exactly. So our body doesn't increase in temperature to help us. That's not a benefit of exercise, or it's not a good acute response per se. Your body just increases in temperature, which is it just happens. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. But it's a side effect of what happens when you exercise. And if you think about it, if I think about myself going running right now, the 3 main things I would say is increased respiratory rate, increased heart rate, and increased body temperature. And so I've just named an acute response from each of these 3 body systems. Okay? Anyway, so increased temperature isn't necessarily a good thing. What happens is that as a result of the increase in number of chemical reactions happening within the muscle, we actually produce a lot more heat. And so the heat escapes the muscles and the body through sweating and the flow of blood to the skin. and this actually helps to exchange heat with the environment. It can result in a decrease in body temperature, okay? So once again, we've got vasodilation of the blood vessels going toward the skin and vasoconstriction of the blood vessels elsewhere. We have the facilitation of sweating and the loss of plasma in the blood through sweating to cool us down. And this can result in a decrease in body temperature. So this increase in temperature isn't a good thing. It just happens because we've got so many chemical reactions occurring within the muscles, and thus this causes a larger production of heat. Another muscular acute response is the increased production of byproducts. If the physical activity intensity is of a high standard and energy is being produced anaerobically, then byproducts will be produced that may cause fatigue. These include hydrogen ions, which cause the muscle to become acidic and cause fatigue. So I'm just going to reassert this because I think it's been a while since I've said it. Anaerobic exercise or anaerobic systems, such as the anaerobic glycolysis system, they cause metabolic fatigue byproducts. So you've got the breakdown of glycogen into glucose into pyruvic acid. This pyruvic acid or pyruvate is then converted to lactic acid and then lactate. Lactate is associated with hydrogen ions, H plus ions, protons, all the same thing. Nonetheless, they actually interfere with the acidity of the muscles. They kind of mess with the pH level of the muscles and can impede upon the muscular contractions happening there. And this can cause fatigue, which can then impede upon your performance and energy production. Okay? So we really want to avoid this. And so just generally, if your activity is of a high standard, you're probably going to be overheating. As a result, you'll have to be using vasodilation and vasoconstriction to redirect the blood flow. It means less blood's going to your working muscles. Therefore, you've got to actually work anaerobically at these muscles. And so you're actually going to be using that anaerobic system, or those anaerobic systems. As such, you're forced to produce these metabolic fatiguing byproducts, so hydrogen ions, as well as inorganic phosphate. Remember, ATP, breaking down ATP into ADP, actually produces inorganic phosphate, PI, and this is actually a metabolic fatiguing byproduct. Also, it's written as PI, like this, so keep that in mind. You've also got the production of adenosine diphosphate, and this can also inhibit the sliding filament's ability to function at full capacity. So your muscles will slide across each other. You've got something called cross-bridge formation. You don't really look at this in VCE, but if you're interested, look up myosin filaments or muscle contractions and how they occur. There are lots of really good GIFs, don't use that word, on the internet. But yeah, this can impact upon the muscle's ability to function at full capacity and therefore reduce the velocity and force production of muscular contractions. So that's why those byproducts are bad. They kind of inhibit proper functioning of these muscles. We've got decreased energy substrate levels. So what are energy substrates? It's pretty much just a fancy term for fuels. How much time we got left? Okay, 15 minutes. We're fine. So energy substrates is a fancy term for fuels. So when energy is produced, energy fuels or substrates such as glucose, triglycerides, ATP, and phosphocreatine will be used. So these substrates are going to be consumed faster than they can be replenished. And so as a result, there'll be a decrease in energy substrate levels at the muscles. So obviously, if you're going running, your body is using up those food fuels. It's using up that glucose. And so the amount of glycogen or glucose that was stored is going to decrease, okay? Even triglycerides eventually. So once you run 2 hours, that glycogen store is probably completely depleted. And so your body's going to move on and start using fats or triglycerides. And so as this time progresses, your triglyceride stores are also going to deplenish. Or just deplete. ATP as well will be used up quite quickly, and same with the phosphocreatine. So all of these stores are going to start decreasing.